Myanmar holds the first phase of elections. Voter turnout stays low across several cities. Junta imposes strict curbs nationwide. International observers call elections illegitimate. Today we examine all that has led to the vote.
Hello and welcome. You're watching another episode of Explained with me, Kriti Mehta. Now let's talk about Myanmar, that has begun a controversial election process nearly 4 years after the military seized power in a coup. The polls are unfolding amid an ongoing civil war, mass displacement and widespread international criticism. The military rulers say the vote will restore democracy. Opponents call it a carefully managed exercise to legitimize continued army rule. So what exactly has happened in the first phase of voting? How will the remaining phases unfold? And why are these elections being rejected by much of the world? Here is a detailed breakdown. The first phase of Myanmar's multi-phase general election concluded on Sunday, December 28. Voting took place in 102 of the country's 330 townships, even as large parts of Myanmar remained engulfed in active conflict. From the start, voter participation appeared weak. Reports from major cities including Yangon and Mandalay pointed to significantly lower turnout compared to the past elections. At several polling stations, journalists and election staff outnumbered the voters. In parts of Naypyidaw, only 20 to 50 people were seen waiting as polls ended, except near housing for government employees. Many residents openly expressed disinterest, saying they saw no meaningful outcome from voting. Others were reluctant to speak at all, fearing repercussions. Myanmar's election rules do not require a minimum turnout, allowing the process to move forward regardless of participation levels. Despite this, the military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party, or the USDP, quickly claimed victory. Senior party officials said the USDP won 82 of 102 lower house seats, where counting was completed. They also claimed all 8 townships in the capital, Naypyidaw. Now, the party's general secretary described its nationwide performance as positive. However, official results from the Union Election Commission have not yet been published. At the same time, voting did not happen across large parts of the country. Elections were cancelled in 65 townships, roughly 1/5 of Myanmar. 56 townships remain under martial law, while 9 others have no announced voting plans. Entire regions controlled by anti-junta forces were excluded. In Rakhine State, voting was limited to just 3 military-held townships. In Chin State, only 2 townships took part. Alongside cancellations, the junta imposed strict controls. A new election protection law criminalized criticism of the polls, with penalties ranging from years in prison to death. By late September, at least 229 people had been charged under this law, including activists who called for boycotts or criticized the vote online. Voters in some areas were barred from mobile phones. Roads to polling stations were blocked by soldiers. More than 40 political parties, including Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, were dissolved. Only 6 military-aligned parties were allowed to contest nationwide. Now, international reaction was swift and critical. Western governments and election watchdogs dismissed the vote as a sham. The UN Human Rights Chief said the polls were taking place amid violence and repression. The UN Special Rapporteur called it a theater of the absurd performance at gunpoint. China, however, took a different position. Their observers were present during the first phase. Along with Russia and to a lesser extent India, China endorsed the election. Beijing views Myanmar's military as essential for regional stability and protection of key infrastructure projects. Let's listen in.
12月28日举行了全国大选的第一阶段投票。中国观察团同有关国家和国际组织代表 现场共同观摩，投票过程总体平稳有序，大选顺利启动。希望接下来的第2、3阶段的投票也能顺利举行，助力缅甸局势回稳降温，政局重回正轨，实现更广泛、更稳定的和平和解，早日恢复国家稳定和发展。
Now, the elections are also unfolding against the backdrop of a failed regional peace effort. In April 2021, 2 months after that coup, Southeast Asian leaders agreed on the 5-point ASEAN consensus. The plan was adopted at a special summit in Jakarta, attended by ASEAN leaders and junta chief Min Aung Hlaing. The consensus called for 5 key steps: an immediate cessation of violence, constructive dialogue among all parties, the appointment of an ASEAN special envoy, humanitarian assistance through ASEAN channels, and direct engagement by the envoy with all sides in Myanmar. Nearly 4.5 years later, the plan remains largely unimplemented. ASEAN foreign ministers have repeatedly expressed concern over the lack of progress. The junta has ignored the agreement, saying it would only consider it once stability was restored, while escalating military operations simultaneously. In response, ASEAN took the unprecedented step of barring Min Aung Hlaing from its summits, allowing only non-political representatives. The rotating one-year term of ASEAN envoys has further weakened mediation efforts. The crisis has also exposed divisions within ASEAN. Countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore and the Philippines have criticized the junta openly. Others, including Cambodia, have resumed engagement. Many analysts, however, now view it as a failed initiative with little influence on the ground. Now, with regional diplomacy stalled and international pressure divided, the junta has pushed ahead with its own political roadmap. Myanmar's elections are being held in 3 phases. As we mentioned earlier, the first took place on December 28th, the second is scheduled for January 11th, the third and the final one on January 25. Final results will be announced only after all phases conclude. The military says this staggered approach will restore stability and return power to civilians. Junta Chief Min Aung Hlaing insists the army forces can be trusted to hand over authority. He has repeatedly described the vote as free and fair. After casting his ballot, Min Aung Hlaing said his future role would be decided by the parliament.
Now, may people that shouldn't canary see them, a jukalari, I'm a party looks on jetty. Now, we are in the Ocho President looks on jetty. Now, you got a confusion looks on jetty. G line, 2 about him. Didn't maybe the Kamale, maybe we need at Nantola, really. Oh, Ajay Yolo Yara. No, Lula be the Amada, you go with Piemelo, Amakanda, or Tamra Loda, or Namepemakan, bigger. The Honda says you go with my teacher and my Piagere. To the Suzu Wawa Piagera. You be a Saint Piago, Nanga Male, a sort of web Piagere. What about the Chujale, Mati Juno Junior, the Gera Genoa, they get sick at it, General Tivan, they go with Suzu Wapiager. Blue Mao, the Nale Bilu, Mayale Drajan, the Chiniti Yauda, Peda, Rajan, Peter Chinjaluition, Jiva, Biogen. I may DJ will be Lama January 30th about DJ. Now, January 2nd, I never DJ, don't you pay me, Aima, Jiva, Arabiduma, Pioval.
On the ground, public sentiment tells a different story. Many citizens say they do not trust the process. Some voted out of fear rather than belief. Others avoided polling altogether, especially in areas influenced by resistance groups. Younger voters expressed anxiety about surveillance and conscription. Several people said the ballot offered no real choice. A few voted in hope of peace, while others said civilians simply do not want these elections. Let's in fact show you some of these reactions.
ကျွန်တော်ဒီနေရတဲ့ဒီစနစ်ပုံစံပေါ့ခွင်လန်းနေကောင်းနဲ့သိရမှာကျွန်တော်ပုံမှန်တိုင်းဆိုဒီတိုင်းပဲဆက်သွားမယ်ဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်အခွင့်အရေးအများကြီးရမယ်လို့ထင်တာပဲဒီလိုမျိုးရာဖြစ်တော့အများကြီးဆုံးရတယ်ထင်တာ
Meanwhile, opposition to the polls has spilled onto the streets as well. Protests were held in Mandalay earlier this month, calling for election rejection and the release of political prisoners. Protests also took place overseas. In Tokyo, Myanmar nationals demonstrated outside the embassy, urging Japan not to recognize the results. Interestingly, Aung San Suu Kyi's son, Kim Il-sung, also joined the protest. Now, while ballots are being cast, the fighting has not stopped. In fact, violence has intensified in the lead up to the vote. The military has continued large-scale attacks across Myanmar. On December 10 this year, an airstrike hit Mraku General Hospital in Rakhine State. 2 bombs destroyed operating rooms and inpatient wards. At least 33 people were reportedly killed and dozens injured, including patients and staff. The military admitted carrying out the strike but claimed armed groups were using the hospital. Witnesses, aid workers, rebel groups and the UN say the victims were civilians. The UN and the World Health Organization have condemned the attack, warning it may amount to a war crime. This was not an isolated incident though. Since the 2021 coup, thousands of civilians have been killed. Air and artillery strikes have hit villages, schools, camps and hospitals. The military has also burned homes, used landmines and carried out mass detentions. In 2025 alone, more than 2,100 airstrikes were recorded. Children have been among those burned alive. Tens of thousands of men have been forcibly conscripted. The humanitarian toll is staggering. More than 3.6 million people are displaced. Over 11 million people face acute food scarcity issues. Half the population now lives beyond the poverty line. Moreover, air deliveries are blocked. Healthcare and education systems have collapsed. Crime and drug production has surged. As violence escalates, resistance has grown stronger and more organized. Pro-democracy activists formed People's Defense Forces, fighting alongside ethnic armed groups. Clashes have spread across central and border regions. Resistance groups have also carried out attacks, claiming efforts to avoid civilian harm. Human rights groups say atrocities are escalating. The UN describes the situation as a never-ending nightmare. Evidence of torture, rape, executions and attacks on civilians continues to mount. But at the center of the Myanmar's political struggle remains one figure, a leader who spent decades symbolizing the country's democratic hopes. Aung San Suu Kyi's Nobel Peace Prize laureate and former leader of Myanmar's elected government was arrested on February 1 in 2021. Her detention followed a military coup that overturned her party's landslide election victory. Suu Kyi has spent much of her adult life in detention. She was first placed under house arrest in 1989. Over the next 2 decades, she was repeatedly detained, released and rearrested. Suu Kyi's political legacy is deeply tied to Myanmar's democracy movement. She co-founded the National League for Democracy in 1988. The party won the 1990 elections, but the military refused to hand over power. After Suu Kyi's release in 2010, she led the NLD to historic victories in 2015 and then in 2020 as well. Though barred from the presidency, she served as state councillor, effectively leading the government. Following the 2021 coup, Suu Kyi was charged and convicted on multiple counts. Her total sentence now stands at 27 years. Suu Kyi's son, Kim Il-sung, says he was not heard from her. He has not heard from her in years. He also fears she may have already died.
Because of the upcoming elections that the military are trying to stage, which we all know are completely unfair and so far from being free that it would be laughable if it wasn't so lamentable, I need to use this small window of opportunity when the international eye is slightly more focused upon what's going on in Burma to my advantage. And you know, my mother's been locked up for almost 5 years now, and any sort of extra pressure I can put on the military I have to take and try my best to move things where they can be moved. For all I know, she could be dead already, and the military have spread rumours around that she is dead at points over the years, or she's had a stroke, or she's mentally incapacitated one way or another.
However, the junta says that she is in good health but has provided no proof. Aris has urged international attention, warning that the world has moved on. While Myanmar's military claims that the elections will restore democracy, critics see an attempt to entrench power. With violence ongoing, opposition widespread, and key leaders behind bars, the vote has raised more questions than answers. As the remaining phases approach, the future of Myanmar remains uncertain. And that's all in this episode of Explained. Keep watching NewsX World for more news and updates from around the world.